Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk, Procedural Racetracks for Mobile Games. My name is Stoyan Dimitrov, and I'm a technical artist at SpaceApe Games. And as a technical artist in a mobile game studio, I usually get involved with writing some shaders to create some cool effects like this power core that you see. Or I would write some pipeline tools between Maya and Unity. Sometimes I would write tools for Maya rigging. But every now and then I get to do the real cool stuff, which is procedural modeling in Houdini. And that's really, really fun. This is like a procedural rock generator I did 1 week. But this is not what the talk is about. But before we dive into it, I want to give you a brief overview of SpaceApe Games. So we are a fairly small mobile game studio based in London. We're about 130 people. And even though we're fairly big right now, 85% of us are divided between smaller teams, and these teams are less than 10 people, sometimes 2 to 3 even. And we do this because we believe that small teams create better games. They validate ideas a lot quicker. And all of these games are exploring different genres. They're trying to solve different challenges, which is really good for me as a technical artist. I get to work on all of these games, and I get to solve like a different problem or a different challenge on each one of these. So this is a reel of some of the games I just showed you. Now, we've been doing procedural generation for quite a while now. Almost all of these games have some kind of tool that generates levels procedurally. But we only learned about Houdini about last year, and we only started using it then. But before that, we used to do these procedural generation tools in C# and Unity. That's the engine we use. And we had this grid-based level creator, and also that creator had a symmetrical placement for models. And in terms of functionality, it wasn't too complicated, but it saved quite a bit of time for our artists and level designers. We also had a procedural stage generator. So it took a curve as an input, and with the press of a button, it generated a whole stage. So it placed all the meshes, it placed all the prefabs, and everything was fairly automatic. It was very quick to change models like that. We also had procedural crowd generation. So based on a very simple input like a box or a sphere, the tool will generate sprites, planes, texture them, and that way you can put crowds in a level very, very quickly. It started becoming a little bit more complicated when we wanted to create procedural tracks. So a few years ago, we started developing this kart racing game for mobile games, for mobile phones. And very early on, we knew that we're going to need a big variety of tracks. We wanted these tracks to have a lot of variation in curvature. We wanted multiple levels. We basically wanted a lot of control. And there are a few ways you can generate tracks. The first, and probably the easiest one, is just having pre-made parts. So an artist creates these 3D parts, and you just stick them together, very similar to how you would do it with these toy electric tracks. That wasn't flexible enough for us, so we went for another approach, which is having those 3D parts, those 3D meshes, and just deform them along a spline. Now remember, this is still done in C# and Unity. And so the way it works is a 3D artist will create this segment of the track. We will subdivide it multiple times, and then the algorithm will do its job, and it will just deform it along the spline itself. And to show you what the tool looked like back then, this is it. So you have multiple Bezier points, and you just create the spline. Each individual point has different parameters that you can control. So the width of the road, on both on the left and the right side, they're independent. You have your off-roads that you can control as well. And it was very quick to update. It's very visual. You can see the outline of the track, but you could not see the final mesh at the end. So if there were issues, it's very hard to spot. We also had this curb that you could add in manually. So If you want a curb, you pretty much have to put it in as a parameter. Okay, so far so good. You lay out your track, and what we had back then is that you press the button, the generate track button, and then you wait. 4.5 minutes of waiting, you stare at a progress bar, and you get a track at the end, which is enough time to get a coffee, honestly. And if you do the math, like if you start, it's not uncommon for an artist or for a designer to edit the track 20 to 30 times a day. And if you do the math, that's about an hour and a half just staring at a progress bar, which is a lot of caffeine. So it's not good. At the end of the day, once that's done, so once the algorithm did its job, you can see all these different parts were placed along the spline. They were deformed correctly. But the track itself ended up looking quite dense, and there were a few other issues as well. So if you look in a little bit deeper into the track, you would see that the walls were not subdivided correctly. So we could have subdivided them beforehand, but that would add a lot more polygon to the track itself. They're not adaptive with the curvature of the track. So that was a problem. Other times you'll get squishing. So because the UVs and the mesh is not generated procedurally, if you put 2 points of the track too close together, they would squish, and you get the exact opposite on corners. The textures would actually stretch. And every now and then with smaller details like the wall caps of these walls, they would just deform into something unrecognizable because it's just a small mesh that deforms along a very kind of general spline. The biggest problem though came from the performance side of things. So our budget for the tracks is only 30,000 verts. And that is because with mobile phones, you need to be very careful with your poly counts. More verts means more bandwidth, means more file size. That's not good for anyone. So that was our budget. We want to hit 60 FPS with that kind of budget. The track ended up being around 73,000 verts, which is almost twice the budget, and it's even more than that. So we were only hitting about 45 out of the 60 FPS we were aiming for. And we thought, okay, how can we optimize this? How can we make this better? One way would be to grab these segments of the track. So when it's a straight part of the track, you would remove them. You don't really need them. And the other offender were these wall caps. So they were looking good, but they also had quite a lot of verts in them. So we wanted one big continuous wall instead. Unfortunately, to do these things, it meant that we needed to create a whole track from scratch instead of deforming pre-made meshes. That wasn't possible with the tools we had in Unity, so we turned to Houdini. And I know a lot of you guys use Houdini for a lot of different things. Some of you do crowd simulations or effects. We use it for procedural modeling, and we use the digital asset creation for that. But we had this problem. We already made tons of tracks with the old tools, so we wanted to have Houdini kind of seamlessly integrate with our current pipeline. And for that, we needed to transfer some data. So we needed to transfer the spline itself that we had. We also wanted local point parameters. So each individual point on the track, we wanted to be altered individually. And we also wanted to transfer some materials and mesh data as well. So how do we do it? For the track spline, imagine these Bezier points that we had on our initial spline. And the handles, we converted into verts. And for every single point, we had a stream of verts that we passed into Houdini. And we did that for every part of the track. So we did it a couple of times, once for the middle part, and then once for the road itself. And then we measured the distance between the road and the middle of the track. So that we do it both for left and right side. Same thing with the off-road. Again, we measure the distance. And sometimes we store more information in the form of vertex color. That's why that red vert is over there. That's information like if you want the whole track to drop off, for example. And the way we store that information is using the attribute Rango node. It's absolutely my favorite node because you can do whatever you want in it. So we just calculated the vectors between, the distance between the individual points, and we set them as point attributes into the middle track, into the middle spline. And the middle spline acts as our backbone, so it hold a lot of data that we can use later on. We also had this helper script. In Houdini Engine, so if you want Houdini Engine to assign a Unity material, you have to actually type in the path manually or copy paste it. We made a script that you can just drag and drop the materials, and that would automatically fill in the path itself. So it's a little bit easier in terms of user experience. And it was the same thing for the meshes as well. And thanks to the Houdini Engine API, it was actually pretty easy to implement that. It was just a few lines of code. So we're quite happy. It was a very seamless workflow. And after we do that, so after we pass all our spline information, you get this series of points in Houdini. And from there on, we just interpolate it into a Houdini spline. And using the refine node, we remove all the points that we don't need. So if it's a straight segment of the track, we just remove those points. We don't really need them. And a very common method of creating roads or tracks like that in Houdini is just have a profile curve and use the sweep nodes. And that sweeps across the first curve we had, and it creates a road. Notice how the texture actually changed, where you have a corner or turn. And we did that using, again, another attribute Wrangle node, just storing the angle data between each individual point. We did a similar thing with the markings, so we just pushed the middle spline out, and with another profile curve and another sweep, we have our markings, we combine them together, and we had something going already, so we can test this in game. And here's what it looks like in Unity. You could adjust the markings dynamically. Everything was completely procedural. You can adjust the width, the size, the position. It was very, very flexible. You could see the result immediately as well. Absolutely, that was lovely. Just seeing the mesh straight away was a very good workflow because you can see if there's any issues arising. The mesh is also adaptive, so if there's no curvature, there's no segments, and also the corner detection worked pretty well. We also managed to maintain the per point data. So we have road width that was based per point on each individual side. We also had off-road width. And that was all working in real time, which is great. You can see the result immediately. It's all in Unity. The designers could just have some fun with this. And not spend time just staring at a progress bar. There was no time for coffee now. They were so happy about this. So we have our roads, but we still need more things to make it a track. We needed walls, so how do we get over that barrier? We had 3D artists. 3D artists make caps for the walls, and we isolate the profile of each of these caps. And then again, similar to the road technique, we just use a sweep node, we extrude it, and then we duplicate the cap on each end, and we put them together, and you have a wall. That was quite flexible because just by changing the cap and the texture of the wall, you get quite a lot of variation. And we wanted that variation because we wanted different walls depending on the curvature of the track. We wanted that to be populated automatically. We also had another feature in the previous track editor where you could actually eliminate parts of the track, and these were done for jumps. We called them drop-offs, and we ended up with these ugly kind of holes when you eliminate part of the track. So again, similar to the wall, we just took this initial spline and we just popped a cap on each end, and it was pretty automatic. Usually artists did that by hand, which I thought was crazy, but using Houdini, it was just like very easy and automatic. Okay, now to make the track a little bit prettier with apexes and decals, it took a turn for the better for sure. So we took each end of the track, and using some vex again, we calculated actually which part is the inside of the turn. We only wanted apexes on the inside of the turn. So we isolate that part of the track, and using another curve and another sweep, again similar to the wall and the road, where we create our apex, and using some vex and some math, we just taper each end of the curve. And that gave us our apex, and it was populated automatically again. There was no need for an artist to specify it manually. We also wanted some decals. Now we had this problem where if you put a decal on the track by hand, sometimes you would get intersection, it will be floating above the track, especially if the track is twisting. It's very hard. You have to actually model a bespoke decal for the track itself. So the way we did that was with a box. We just boolean out the whole track, and we use the box parameters to generate UVs. And that way you get this kind of ghetto decal. Usually you would do it with deferred shading, but that's so expensive on mobile. This way it was cheap, and it pretty much did the same job. We also wanted good UVs for a track. So it's a very common method to generate UVs in this way when you're extruding on splines. Again, you just grab the curve that you use as a profile, you convert it to NURBS, and using the arc length of that curve, you would actually calculate the UVs, and then you turn it back into polygons. It's the exact same thing with the path, only this time we alter the scale with the arc length. So if the path is very long, or it corresponds to the length of the track, basically. And once you do the sweep, you automatically get UVs out of that, which was great. So we don't have to do any unwrapping afterwards or anything like that. So we had everything done for us. For mobile games, light mapping is very important. We rarely do real-time lighting for environments. It's usually baked. So it's very important to have good UVs. And this is an example of what Unity gave us out of the box. And Unity left a lot of empty space, which we didn't like. So we turned to Houdini again. And because we already had UVs from generating it for the textures initially, all we needed to do is cut the track every 3 meters or so. That was adjustable. You could adjust it however you want. And this gave us segments that we can lay out later using the UV flatten node. And using the UV flatten node, we got something more like this. And it was perfect. It was so good. It was just, everything was filled. I think we had something like 80% like fill rate for the sheet, which gave us really, really nice light maps. We could reduce the resolution in the end, even. So this is what the actual tracks look like. The track editor. After you put everything together, it still works in almost real time. Every time you drag the track updates, we still maintain the width adjustment, and the walls update automatically. You can see the mesh changes depending on curvature. The texture of the track changes. Everything is placed completely automatically. You don't need to specify anything apart from the curvature and the width as an artist. We also had a different type of turn. So we had this sharp corner and applied a different shader, and that was again done automatically. The apex could be controlled dynamically as well if you wanted wider apexes on your track. And this is the track drop-off I mentioned earlier. So you could remove some of the walls if you wanted to. So you can just drop from each side. You can remove the whole track if you wanted to. And the cap adjusts itself dynamically depending on the road width. So that was very handy. And that pretty much gave you everything you need as an artist or as a designer to create a good-looking track. And you see it pretty much straight away. So this is the final track we had at the end after you do all your adjustments, everything you need. And after some love from an artist, some lighting, and some props, this is what you get at the end. So I know the props probably could have been placed procedurally as well, but we just didn't get that far. But overall, we're very happy with how the track looked in the end. There were none of these issues I mentioned before. But what about performance? So remember, our budget was 30,000 Vs. And our previous track was 73,000 Vs. And by removing those segments that we didn't need and those wall caps that we didn't need, we ended up with having a track that was only 13,000 Vs, which is incredible. We managed to hit our 60 FPS target, and we're very happy. Even on low-end devices, that track was very performant now. And here is what it looks like in game. And so, thanks guys. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me now or just PM me later if you're shy right now. Do we have a Q&A?
We do.
Okay, let's do it.
I have a question. Wait. Oh, I love this thing so much. Hello? All right. So I have a question about the drop-offs, the creation of the drop-offs.
Yeah.
In the Unity editor, it looked like the way you created those was by flipping the curve. Or did you actually delete a section of the curve? Or what was the mechanism that allowed the artist to be able to create the breakage of the curve or the drop-off inside of the Unity editor?
In the Unity editor, we had a tick box, basically. And once we're passing the data between Unity and Houdini, the vertices that coded that data, they were just read. And Houdini, I just read that as, okay, cut the spline over here, and that was it. It was pretty simple.
Okay. What? Is it on? Yeah. Okay. So my question about Lightmap UV.
Yes.
I don't know if it's the same for Unity, but when I'm working on Unreal, it's just to stitch certain parts of the UV together, so you have big patches and stuff, so they don't get like separate. And how do you handle that with your UV?
So we did, I don't know if you noticed before, we did have big chunks of mesh like that. So they were stitched together, big parts of the track, but because of the curvature, it wasn't packing very well. So splitting it up for us made a lot more sense. I know it creates a bit more verts in the end for the GPU, but it managed to pack everything very nicely together. It was just a nice balance. Of course, you can have bigger chunks. You can adjust the parameter, you can have bigger chunks, but we found that smaller ones looked better.
Okay, thank you.
What was very interesting for me is the way you'd already really defined the problem space really well, and you'd already solved it once before.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, how much development time did it then take for you to put this system together?
Well, it took a little bit longer than anticipated because I didn't really know Houdini when I started doing this. So I had to learn it and do this at the same time. It took about a month, or I think month or two to put it together, and then another month to kind of polish it and make sure everything that the artist needed was there. There was a lot of effort spent to make sure that it's easy. I wanted no buttons to be pressed unnecessarily. It's just, yeah, it was, at the end, it was very easy, but it took a bit of effort. So yeah, about 2 months, I would say.
And did you find that you changed any of the logic that you had in your previous system? Did you reinvent any of the kind of relationships between these components when you did it in Houdini, or was it really a mapping from that previous system to Houdini?
Well, the previous system didn't generate any meshes from scratch. It used pre-generated meshes, so it was a completely different thing. And so yeah, it was a completely separate way of generating the track. It looked the same in the end, but the underlying way of generating was completely different.
One quick question for a smaller team.
Wait for the
For a smaller team that doesn't have a level designer and a Houdini person, would you rather keep this all in Houdini than bring it in Unity at the very end, instead of making the tool work in Unity and have to be each track designed in Unity? Would you rather stay in Houdini to do that?
That's a good question. The issue with us is because most people were very familiar with Unity, but not many people were familiar with Houdini. In fact, I was the only one at the time. So it made sense to make something in Unity that people could use. But if it was just me doing tracks for the whole game, I would probably do it in Houdini and just export the mesh later on.
Thanks.
All right, thank you all.